All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving deep into communication itself.
Oh wow, that's pretty meta, isn't it? Talking about talking.
You know it. But hey, it's something we all do all day, every day, and most of us could probably be use a tune-up, right? So we're tackling The Next Conversation by Jefferson Fisher.
Ooh, that title alone, right? Argue less, talk more. I mean, who doesn't want that?
Exactly. And what I love about Fisher's approach is he's not some stuffy academic. He was a trial lawyer, so high-stakes communication was his bread and butter.
Yeah, like think about that pressure cooker of a courtroom.
But what he realized is those skills, really understanding the other person, managing your reactions, that's gold in everyday life too. Family, friends, work, even just ordering a coffee, it all goes smoother when you're communicating well.
It's like those courtroom tactics actually translate surprisingly well to like asking your roommate to do the dishes.
Huh. Right. So Fisher boils it down to a few core things. First, you got to remember, the person you see isn't always the person you're talking to. There's a whole other internal conversation happening under the surface.
Like they might be having a terrible day or dealing with something you have no clue about, and it's coloring everything.
Then there's the whole mastering your own response piece. Like when you feel yourself getting heated, understanding those ignition and cooling phases and knowing your personal triggers.
Oh yeah, the triggers, that's huge.
Yeah.
Once you know what sets you off, you can actually start to like manage those reactions instead of letting them control you.
Absolutely. And then there's communicating with confidence, but not in an aggressive way. It's more about choosing your words carefully, having a firm but respectful tone, knowing your boundaries.
It's not about bulldozing people over, it's about making sure your voice is heard and your needs are met, but in a way that also respects the other person.
And finally, he gives us some real tangible strategies for those tough conversations, the ones you'd rather avoid. And the whole point is connection, not winning.
Not trying to score points or prove you're right, but actually building stronger relationships.
So that's our mission in this deep dive, to unpack all of that chapter by chapter and give you, dear listener, actionable stuff you can use today to communicate better and build stronger connections.
Let's jump right in then, starting with the prologue. Fisher takes us back to his childhood, these opening weekend hunts with his family, a whole bunch of trial lawyers. What jumped out at you there?
Right off the bat, you see how communication was almost like the family sport. This 8-year-old kid soaking up all this persuasive talk storytelling from these legal minds.
Like osmosis, he's just absorbing it.
Totally. But here's the kicker. He later realized that law school, even though it's all about, making a case, it doesn't actually teach you the human side of communication.
The empathy. Like navigating those everyday disagreements without blowing up.
Exactly. It's focused on legal strategy, not people strategy.
That's such a good distinction. Law school's about logic, arguments within this whole structured system. But real life, come on, conversations are messy. Emotions, baggage, you never know what someone's bringing to the table.
And Fisher brings that to life so well with those stories about his siblings. Sarah and the invisible pancakes, Jonathan stammering, Jacob's temper. He had to figure out how to talk to each of them differently.
Oh yeah, those were great. Like totally different personalities, different needs. And he had to adapt on the fly.
It makes you think about your own family, doesn't it? How we all learn those early communication patterns, what works, what doesn't.
Totally. Like, was there a sibling you could never get through to, or one you always fought with?
And then there's that twist in the prologue where he talks about, achieving professional success as a lawyer, but still feeling kind of empty. He even describes it as, running with a parachute.
Oh, yeah, that feeling of being held back. Like you're not living up to your full potential.
And that leads him to start sharing communication advice online, just from his truck, raw and real.
No fancy studio, just him, his phone, and his insights.
And that's what resonated with people. It shows you that sometimes the most powerful communication is the most genuine, right from the heart.
Absolutely. People crave authenticity. So moving on to why I wrote this book, Fisher lugs out his main motivations. What were those?
Well, he says, first, his followers online kept asking for it. He sees it as their book, which is cool. Second, he wanted to teach practical skills, like things you can use immediately in your next conversation.
Not just theory, but actual tools.
And third, to leave a legacy for his kids, his family, something to pass down.
And it's worth noting, he's really clear that this isn't just him theorizing. It's grounded in his own life, his professional experiences, with some psychology and neuroscience sprinkled in.
Yeah, it's not some ivory tower stuff. It's battle-tested, real-world advice. And he makes a pretty bold promise. to give you the words to communicate assertively, handle defensiveness, set boundaries, and even take the difficult out of difficult conversations.
That's a tall order. But as we go through the book, we see how he delivers on that.
Now, in How to Apply This Book, he gives some crucial advice on how to actually use this stuff. What's the main takeaway there?
Oh, this is so important. He says, don't try to change everything at once. Pick one thing that resonates with you and focus on that.
Like, if you're a chronic over-apologizer, just work on catching yourself saying sorry unnecessarily.
Exactly. Small changes, one at a time, can make a huge difference.
He also encourages you to, really get into the book highlight, make notes, make it your own.
It's a tool, not just something to read passively.
So then we get into part 1, the essentials. What's the big idea there?
This part is all about the power of our words. They have a ripple effect. What you say to one person can impact how they interact with others, and so on. It's bigger than just that one conversation.
Think about how one rude comment can ruin your whole day and maybe even affect how you treat your family later on.
Exactly. And he makes it clear. Kind actions aren't enough. You got to back it up with kind words. Your words should match your actions,
So that sets the stage for Chapter 1, I Never Win an Argument. And he opens with this fascinating story about a deposition with a guy named Bobby Lepre.
Oh, man, what a perfect example of how the person you see isn't always the person you're talking to.
So Lepre comes in all aggressive, distrustful, ranting about lawyers. And Fisher, instead of fighting back, he does something totally unexpected. He says, I'm sorry, I can't imagine what that's like. And then, but what I can tell you is, you're a good son.
Talk about disarming. He doesn't try to win the argument. He tries to connect with the human being.
And it completely throws Lepre off guard. He starts crying. Turns out he's carrying all this worry about his mother. That tough exterior was just a mask.
It's a reminder that those big emotional reactions, there's often a whole other conversation going on underneath.
The iceberg analogy, right? What you see is just the tip.
And it challenges us to look deeper, to try to understand what's driving those reactions.
And then he reinforces this with that story about Evan, his third-grade reading buddy. Evan was bigger than him, but really struggled with reading.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
And at first, Fisher just didn't get it. But then he learns about Evan's home-life mom in jail, absent father. It hits him. This kid is living a completely different reality.
It's a powerful reminder that everyone has their own context, their own struggles. We got to approach each other with curiosity, not judgment.
And that leads to the challenge to accept, where he basically says, hey, stop seeing arguments as failures. See them as chances to learn and connect.
Yeah, we learn from our mistakes in other areas of life. Why not in communication?
And he points out, as we grow up, the stakes change. It's not just playground squabbles anymore. Our responsibilities are bigger. The topics are heavier.
And he makes a great point. We all kind of know, conceptually, that we should manage our emotions, communicate clearly, etc. But this book is about the how-to, the what does that actually look like in real life?
Which takes us to Chapter 2, The Power of Your Next Conversation. And here, he gives us some much-needed hope. Basically, we're all going to mess up sometimes. It's inevitable.
It's human to make mistakes, especially in communication.
But the good news is, one screw-up doesn't have to be the end of the story. Your next conversation is a chance to fix things, clarify, reconnect.
Like a reset button.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He tells the story about a miscommunication with a friend over lunch and how, instead of reacting defensively, he could have handled it better by listening first, acknowledging his friend's feelings, and then sharing his own perspective.
Active listening, always key. Putting understanding before being understood.
And he gives us these 2 powerful questions to ask ourselves before conversation. What's my goal here? And what values do I need to uphold to reach that goal?
So we're not just reacting emotionally, but approaching the conversation with intention.
He also shares that funny story about the text message with his mom about a white Nissan, where his tone totally got misinterpreted.
Oh yeah, classic text message miscommunication.
Which highlights how crucial those nonverbal cues are: facial expressions, tone of voice. Without those, it's easy to misunderstand each other, especially in writing.
And speaking of nonverbal cues, he talks about how most of us are shockingly unaware of our own body language, our volume, facial expressions, those little tics we all have.
You might be totally stressed out after a phone call, but not even realize you're scowling at your coworker in the hallway.
I'm like, whoa, what did I do?
Exactly. So becoming self-aware is key. The more you understand your own internal state and how you're coming across, the more control you have over your communication.
Makes sense. Now let's dig into cut 2, lack of understanding. What's the core problem Fisher identifies here?
He says it's that stubborn insistence on seeing the world only through our own lens. Like, the more we try to force others to agree with us, the more they resist.
It's not always about the difference in beliefs, but the failure to understand why someone holds those beliefs.
He gives some pretty brutal examples of things people say when they just don't get where the other person's coming from, like questioning someone's intelligence just because they have different political views.
Oof, yeah. That's when things get toxic fast.
And to help us move past that, he introduces this idea of functional thinking.
So, like, how does that work in communication?
He compares it to solve for X in algebra. You have inputs, the strategies, words, techniques you use, and outputs, the results you get.
Like understanding the relationship between what you do and what happens as a result.
Exactly. And he uses examples like coffee makers and recipes. If you put in the right ingredients, you get the desired outcome.
Makes sense. So the book is like providing those ingredients for better communication.
Which leads us to Rule 1, say it with control, and Chapter 4, control yourself. This is where he dives into managing our own reactions, especially in arguments. He uses this cute story about reading a bedtime story to his daughter, Lily, to introduce the ignition and cooling phases.
Oh, those phases are so relatable. I think we've all been there.
So the ignition phase is when things start heating up. You feel threatened, defensive, and bam, you might say something you regret.
Like your brain is basically flooded with emotion and logic goes out the window.
Then there's the cooling phase. Things calm down, you start reflecting, maybe feeling a little guilty.
That's when your prefrontal cortex kicks back in, and you can think more rationally.
He illustrates this with the argument between Grace and John about their daughter. They both get caught up in the heat of the moment, saying things they don't mean.
Classic fight or flight response, right? Our bodies are wired for it.
And he explains that understanding this biological basis helps us realize that those emotional outbursts aren't always personal attacks. They're often just involuntary reactions to feeling threatened.
So instead of blaming the other person, we can start to see our own reactions with more curiosity and compassion.
Like he says, what triggers you teaches you, which leads us to the next section, meet your triggers. He breaks them down into two types, physical and psychological.
Can you explain those a bit more?
Physical triggers are things that directly impact your sense of safety. Someone yelling, invading your space, getting physical.
Yeah, those are pretty obvious.
Psychological triggers are more about your thoughts and interpretations, like worrying about what others think, feeling like your competence is being challenged, or fearing loss.
Oh, so like social anxiety, feeling insecure about your abilities, worrying about a relationship ending.
Exactly. And he gives all these examples for each type, which makes it really relatable, like feeling vulnerable when you have to decline an invitation, or feeling attacked when someone criticizes your favorite political candidate.
Because you've kind of tied your identity to that candidate.
Right. And he emphasizes that noticing those physical reactions to conflict, like someone raising their voice or your own shoulders tensing up, that's not about taking it personally. It's about gathering information.
Information about their emotional state or your own.
It's a signal that someone is feeling threatened. So instead of reacting to win the argument, you can try to de-escalate the situation.
Cool it down instead of fanning the flames.
So by knowing our own triggers and recognizing them in others, we develop what Fisher calls discernment, which helps us communicate more effectively.
It's like having an emotional radar.
Now, Chapter 5, Control the Moment, focuses on a very specific point in a conflict, that crucial moment before things fully blow up.
Like that split second where you can still choose a different path.
Exactly. There's a shift in the mood, a pause that hangs in the air, a change in tone. But we often miss it because we're so focused on controlling the other person.
We're so busy thinking about what they're doing wrong that we don't manage our own reactions.
He tells this great story about prepping his colleague, Elizabeth, for a deposition where the other lawyer was super aggressive.
Sounds intense.
And that's where he introduces his key tool. Your first word is your breath. Basically, before you even think about responding, take a deliberate breath.
Like hijacking your physiology.
It's about engaging that controlled breathing response, which instantly calms you down. Those first 2 seconds of your reaction can make all the difference.
Either you fuel the fire or you start to put it out.
He then goes deep on the benefits of intentional breathing, using terms like breath work and controlled breathing. He explains how nasal breathing is superior to mouth breathing.
So how's that work?
Well, nasal breathing filters and warms the air, engages your diaphragm more, leads to fuller breaths, And ultimately, you breathe slower, which helps lower stress.
Fascinating. Like something so simple can have such a big impact.
He even mentions that Stanford study on the physiological sigh, that double inhale followed by a long exhale as a quick stress reliever.
Got to try that one.
And then there's rhythmic breathing, like box breathing, which helps regulate your heart rate and focus. He compares it to military training, how they use it to stay calm under pressure.
So taking a few deep breaths before a tough conversation can literally change your brain chemistry.
Then he introduces the quick scan technique, a way to become more aware of your body's stress signals.
What are the steps involved in that?
First, you take that conversational breath, bringing your attention inward. Then, at the top of your inhale, close your eyes for a second. As you exhale, scan your body for tension and try to release it. And finally, label the emotion you're feeling with a single word.
So like anxious, frustrated, overwhelmed.
He shares how he uses this himself in all kinds of situations to get a handle on his emotions. And then he explains how to communicate those emotions in a non-confrontational way using I can tell statements.
So instead of saying you're making me angry, you say, I can tell I'm feeling angry.
It shifts the focus from blame to simply stating your internal experience.
Makes you less likely to come across as accusatory.
He also introduces these small talks, these short phrases that help you stay grounded in stressful moments.
Oh, like mantras.
Kind of, but more action-oriented. He uses ones like, you be Jefferson, wait for the right pitch, let the facts tell the truth.
I like that. It's like giving yourself a pep talk, a reminder of your values.
And he emphasizes using verbs in those phrases, speak my truth, welcome the difficult. It's about prompting yourself to take action.
Not just passively accepting the situation.
Then there's that story about coaching his client, Chuck, during a deposition, using the analogy of answering a question about weekend plans to help Chuck slow down and control his pace.
Because when we're nervous or upset, we tend to rush our speech.
Which leads us to the gift of a pause. Rushing is a sure sign of that ignition phase taking over. You miss details, you don't listen as well, and you might blurt something out you regret.
It makes you seem flustered and less in control.
He addresses that fear of silence being seen as weakness, saying, actually, rushing is the real weakness. Slowing down shows strength and control.
It allows you to collect your thoughts and choose your words carefully.
He even talks about how long pauses can be super effective with dishonest people. Honest people are fine with silence, but liars often feel this need to fill it.
Like they get uncomfortable with the quiet and start rambling, which can actually reveal inconsistencies in their story.
He gives an example from an 18-wheeler driver's deposition. So, the takeaway is, don't be afraid of silence, use it strategically.
Moving on to Rule 2, say it with confidence. And Chapter 7, assertive voice. Fisher starts by debunking this myth that confidence is something you can just, summon on demand.
He says it's actually the ability to operate under a feeling of knowledge and appreciation for your strengths and your limits.
So it's not about being arrogant or pretending you know everything.
It's about knowing what you're good at, what you're not so good at, and being comfortable with both. And then he drops this gem. Every word matters.
That's powerful. Every word.
He's saying that our word choices reflect who we are, our character, our reputation. And he shows how subtle changes in wording can completely shift a message from tentative to assertive.
Like instead of, I think maybe, you say, I'm confident that.
He also makes a distinction between being direct and being demanding. Being assertive is about stating your needs clearly and respectfully, not bulldozing people over.
It's about standing up for yourself without being a jerk.
Then there's the whole speak when it matters thing.
Which means?
Knowing when your input is truly valuable and avoiding those unnecessary comments that just derail the conversation. He gives an example from a partners meeting where someone kept adding irrelevant stuff and it just bogged things down.
They've all been in those meetings.
And then, this might sound counterintuitive, but he says over-explaining kills confidence.
Really? But shouldn't you explain yourself clearly?
Well, he says over-explaining often comes from this fear of not being believed, which ties back to those social evaluation triggers. But the irony is, the more you over-explain, the less credible you sound.
Like you're trying too hard to convince them.
Exactly. Just be direct and to the point. And then finally, in this chapter, there's minding your tone.
What makes a tone assertive but not aggressive?
He describes it as balanced, respectful of yourself and the other person. It's steady, even, conveys conviction and expectation.
So, not yelling or being passive-aggressive, but also not backing down.
Moving on to Chapter 8, Difficult People. He starts by acknowledging that conflicts with those closest to us, family, friends, are often the hardest. And he challenges this idea that empathy alone is always the answer.
Because sometimes empathy can be draining or even exploited.
He says sometimes with difficult people, you gotta have stronger boundaries. So he gives us strategies for handling insults and rude comments.
Give us the goods. How do we deal with those?
For insults, first, create a long pause after they say it. Let their words hang in the air. Don't give them the reaction they're looking for.
Deprive them of that dopamine hit.
Second, slowly repeat what they said so they hear it again.
Oof, that would be powerful.
And third, keep breathing out. Stay in control of your own body.
Don't let their words hijack your emotions.
For general rudeness, he recommends a short pause to assess if it's even worth engaging. Then you can ask a question of intent. Did you mean for that to sound rude?
Calling them out on their tone.
And finally, he often suggests replying with silence. Just let their bad behavior speak for itself.
Sometimes silence is the best response.
He also tackles apologies, how to spot a fake one, and how to respond to those.
Oh yeah, the non-apologies. We all know those.
He lists a few types. The blame-shifting apology, I'm sorry if I did anything. To that, you can say, an apology accepts responsibility.
Straight to the point.
Then there's the no empathy apology, I'm sorry you feel that way. To that, you can say, don't apologize for my feelings, apologize for what you did.
Holding them accountable.
Then there's the excuse-driven apology, I'm sorry I've just been so stressed. To that, you can say, your stress didn't do that. You did.
Taking away their excuse.
And finally, the toxic apology. I'm sorry I'm such a horrible person. The best response to that is simply, I'm willing to accept an apology.
So setting a boundary and not engaging with their self-pity.
He then gives us a 3-step process for handling interruptions. First, let the first one slide.
Give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't realize they were interrupting.
Second, calmly use their name to get their attention back.
Bringing the focus back to you.
And third, correct the behavior using I statements. I can't hear you when you interrupt, or I need you to let me finish my thought.
Asserting your right to speak without being aggressive.
He also gives us some advanced techniques for disagreeing without losing ground, the is it worth it filter, which helps you avoid pointless arguments.
Choosing your battles.
Then there's I see it differently for when you disagree on the details but agree on the goal.
Acknowledging the different perspectives without necessarily trying to change them.
And I take another approach for when you disagree on methods but want the same outcome.
Showing that there are multiple ways to achieve the same goal.
He also tackles saying no to unwanted invitations, which can be so awkward.
Ugh, yeah. The dreaded no word.
His method is simple. Express gratitude. Give a firm I can't, and reiterate your thanks.
No need to over-explain or make excuses.
He reminds us that no is a complete sentence. And finally, he talks about setting boundaries,
which is essential for healthy relationships.
He suggests creating a personal operator's manual, basically, a set of rules for what you will and won't accept in communication.
So like, I don't tolerate yelling, or I don't engage in gossip.
You can use I don't statements or redirecting phrases. And crucially, he says, a boundary without a consequence is just a suggestion.
You got to back it up with action if someone repeatedly crosses the line.
He also reminds us that just because someone's uncomfortable with your boundaries doesn't mean they're wrong.
Sometimes people don't like boundaries because it forces them to change their behavior.
But he cautions against having too many boundaries, which can make it hard to collaborate and be responsible.
It's about finding that balance between protecting yourself and being open to others.
Moving on to Chapter 10, Frames. Fisher uses this analogy of shoe shopping.
Okay, shoe shopping. How does that relate to communication?
He says, just like having fewer choices can sometimes lead to a better decision when buying shoes, having a clear, limited set of goals in a conversation makes it more productive.
So not trying to cram in a million different topics at once.
Right. He says conversations without a clear goal can feel aimless and overwhelming. And he points out that we often try to figure out what to say while we're talking, which he calls being good with takeoff, but not knowing how to land.
It can only get you so far.
So instead of just reacting, he encourages us to frame our conversation.
Meaning?
It's like setting the agenda up front. You clearly state what you want to talk about, how you hope to feel afterward, and you get their buy-in to have that conversation.
So everyone's on the same page from the start.
He gives some examples of framing phrases like, I want to talk about X, and I hope that by the end of this conversation, we both feel Y. And then you ask, are you open to talking about this with me?
So you're not just springing it on them.
And he explains how to reframe a conversation that's gotten derailed, acknowledge the shift, restate the original frame, and invite them back to the topic.
Steering it back on course.
Chapter 11, Defensiveness, opens with a story about Fisher cross-examining a biomechanical engineer.
Another courtroom example. I sense a theme here.
The engineer gets asked a simple question and immediately jumps to defending his expertise, which, ironically, makes him look less credible to the jury.
Because defensiveness makes people question your motives.
Exactly. And Fisher points out that we all get defensive sometimes, not just experts. It's a natural reaction when we feel threatened.
Totally. But it's not very productive.
He lists some common signs of defensiveness, sarcasm, the silent treatment, laughing off serious issues. And he explains that our beliefs are often tied to our loved ones and memories, so disagreeing with a belief can feel like an attack on those connections.
It's like you're not just attacking my idea, you're attacking my whole worldview.
Which is why logic alone often fails to overcome defensiveness. It can actually make people dig in deeper.
Because emotions trump logic, especially in heated moments.
And he points out two big problems with defensiveness. It prevents others from understanding you, and it shuts you off from understanding them.
It's a lose-lose situation.
He then introduces two cognitive biases that contribute to defensiveness: the fundamental attribution error and confirmation bias.
You explain those briefly?
Sure. The fundamental attribution error is our tendency to blame someone's personality for their behavior, ignoring situational factors. Like, if someone's rude to you, you assume they're just a jerk without considering that they might be having a terrible day.
So we jump to conclusions about their character.
Confirmation bias is our tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs and ignore anything that contradicts them. So, if you already believe someone is a jerk, you'll only notice their rude behavior and ignore any kindness they show.
We see what we want to see.
He uses the example of a simple okay text message that gets misinterpreted because someone is already assuming the worst.
It's like creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of negativity.
His advice is to put down those assumptions and assume positive intent until proven otherwise. And he stresses the importance of owning your own words and realizing you don't have to respond to everything.
Sometimes the best response is no response.
He defines accountability for defensiveness as choosing to point inward instead of outward.
So instead of blaming the other person, you examine your own reactions.
He gives us a 3-step process to stop getting defensive. Catch yourself with a conversational breath, that 9-second pause. Let their words fall to the ground. Don't react immediately. And get curious. Ask yourself what's motivating them.
Shifting from reaction to reflection.
And then he gives us 3 ways to prevent others from getting defensive. Start your sentences with I to focus on your own feelings. Replace why questions with what, when, or how to avoid sounding accusatory, and acknowledge their feelings first before presenting your own.
So validating their experience before introducing your own perspective.
Finally, we reach Chapter 12, the next conversation. Here, Fisher brings it all together, reminding us that by reading this book, we're choosing to see arguments as opportunities for understanding, not winning.
It's about growth, not victory.
He says how you handle a difficult conversation reveals your character, and difficult conversations become even more difficult if you don't know your goal or how to achieve it.
Like going in blindfolded.
So his advice is to remove the difficult before the conversation even starts.
By being prepared and knowing what you want to achieve.
He talks about ineffective approaches being too aggressive, too soft, too passive, and he stresses the importance of preparing yourself emotionally and mentally before even attempting to connect with the other person.
So doing your own work first.
He also gives advice on setting aside time for difficult conversations, making it clear, specific, and convenient for the other person.
Not just saying, we need to talk, and leaving them hanging.
And this might sound counterintuitive, but he suggests being direct from the get-go, like actually saying it's going to be a difficult conversation.
So no beating around the bush.
He believes that's actually kinder because it allows the other person to prepare themselves.